right?
Okay, we're good.
And we're live. Okay, we are live. So we're gonna take this out. So anyway, welcome to the Supplement Snoop podcast. This is episode number 1, and I don't even want to say like my first guest. I want to put it more like my first co-host that I'm
Oh, I
ever gonna have
love
on here because I feel like it's gonna be a back and forth kind of thing.
100%.
So my first co-host, Jess Whitman. I am so excited to finally sit down and chat with you. So thank you for taking the time out to hang out with me tonight.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me as your co-host. This is great.
Right? Yeah, because I figured we're probably going to go down this road where we end up asking each other questions and kind of hanging out. So, because I think you said it perfectly, we were already talking about this, how we've known each other for a while, but not really known each other.
Right.
I look because I follow along with your content and I see all this stuff, but I'm like, I just want to hear because I think like one of the things that happens is we see people on social media and we see this snapshot of their lives. And this is kind of what I wanted to do with this whole podcast is
Mhm.
we see Jess, Jess just turned 22 and we see her in this, spot, right? But I'm like, how do you don't just wake up, 22-year-old Jess with all these things going on and it doesn't just, happen overnight. So that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. And I think that's always great because the story is what makes everybody's life interesting. Like, no one cares about where you're at right now. They care about what happened up until that point. And that's what everyone talks about, you know?
Exactly. So we were also discussing how one of the weird things, like when you see a podcast or whenever you do one of these things, as an introductory kind of thing, people will always say, like, hey, introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself. And when you do as many things as you do, I realize like that would be such a terrible question for you because you would be here for like an hour giving a background. So in your bio, you're like, so you compete, you're a
Mhm.
coach, you do all this amazing stuff for like empowerment that I see on here. So I thought like a better question would be like, if you like, what is a typical Jess day? Like you get up and how does your day kind of go about?
That's a really great question. And I
Thank you.
actually love this question because my day is a very weird day. So I, I actually wake
Right.
up in the morning between 3:30 and 4 a.m. So I wake up extremely early.
That's when I go to bed, probably.
Yeah, we're flip-flopped.
Yeah.
Like it's past my bedtime right now. I'm usually asleep. Um,
22.
I know. It's a problem. I'm like the oldest, youngest person that I know. That's what I like to say. I really am. I'm an old soul. So yes, I wake up between 3:30 and 4 a.m., which is pretty unconventional for me, I will say. That's more of a prep thing that I do because I do
Mm,
have a lot of stuff for prep that I just like to knock out in the morning because I'm a morning person. So I wake up, I'm ready to go. So I'll do my fasted cardio, I'll go on my walk, I'll get my steps in. On my walk, I usually will either do like some kind of meditation while I'm walking or something along those lines just to kind of get myself in the zone. And then I'll come inside, shower, take care of my doggos.
mhm.
And then, yeah, I'll just start work first thing after I get all that out of the way. So my work at first is always going to be client work. So that would be Mondays and Tuesdays are going to be programming. And then Wednesdays and Thursdays are my call days in the afternoons. But in the mornings, I usually do some type of like educational activity during those days. So really big on learning. So
Mhm.
Wednesdays and Thursdays will be either like researching or I really love chemistry. So I'll research stuff on that or like just random things I just find interesting. So sometimes it's physics, it just depends on the day, really. But I'll just like learn something. And I think even if it isn't related to coaching, I just like to keep the habit of learning. So
Mhm.
learn something. So morning is either client check-ins or learning. And then the afternoon, I'll usually train, wrap up any client work, do like programs back end stuff, and business stuff is always in the afternoon, as well as content filming, anything along those lines.
Right.
Eat, walk, and go to bed. That's my
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like no wonder you go to sleep like so early because you're doing way more during your day than I am. So no wonder you go to bed so early. Do you use you like train like in the middle of your day, seems
I
like.
do. Yeah, I do.
Do you use that as almost, because that's what I do. I use it almost as like a just a little bit of we'll take a break and go do something for yourself that you enjoy doing. Use it as like maybe like a little bit of a mental reset, so to speak.
I would agree with that 100%.
Hmm.
Yeah. I usually try to go to the gym like after all of my work that requires like talking is done, because then I just need like a reset after that. So I'm just like quiet time and then I'm good
Yeah,
to go.
yeah. It's like I almost use it as like a midday meditation kind of thing that people sometimes do, where you're like, because if not, you would probably end up just sitting there doing work all day long. Next thing you know, the day's gone and you haven't gone out into public and interacted with people at all.
Exactly. Yeah. And that has happened before. So,
Yeah, it's easy to do.
mhm.
So we talked about something that you said that I wanted to talk about, because we mentioned how there's this snapshot of people's lives that we see. Like if I go onto your page, if I just discover you, this week, and I look, and people will already make their judgments about the type of person you are and your life and things like that. But you mentioned the one day you said that you had a business when you were 16, so we're talking 6 years ago, um, that was around Pop Tarts, and then you said it was Progress and Pop Tarts. And as soon as I heard you say that about having this thriving business at 16, I was like, holy shit, I need to hear the story behind this.
Oh, yes. Buckle up, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually kind of funny, because that business grew so much further than I ever expected it to. It was the most successful that my coaching had ever been, ever, even up until now. Like
Yeah.
it was thriving. So I started competing when I was 16 was my first show, but I started prepping for it when I was 15 years old in high school.
Wow.
So, oh yeah.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was prepping for my show is when I started offering bodybuilding coaching. My coach, I was like really inspired by helping people. And I previously had a different coach to help me after my eating disorder before that. And I was really inspired by the way she was able to help me. So I was like, I want to do this. And I was 15, 16 years old, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So went online, looked at like certifications, started educating myself and things like that. And what do you do when you're 15 and 16 years old? You eat Pop Tarts, man. Like, what else are you supposed to
Right.
do? So, when I was like trying to come up with names for my business, I swear to God, if you go on my Instagram page, my old one, and I showed you my archives, when this phase of my journey was happening, I would eat a Pop Tart every day before the gym, and I would take a picture of it and I would post it on my Instagram story, and I would hashtag it like Pop Tarts and Pump or something. It was Pop Tarts and Pump. And I would post on my story. And at first, it was just like a little thing that I did. And
Mm-hmm.
then by the time I started my coaching company, I had probably 20 to 30 people a day tag me with Pop Tarts. And I would just repost on my story. And it just kept getting more and more and more. And my following grew from like 2,000 to like 20,000 from Pop Tarts. It was absurd. I think back and I don't even understand. But yeah, I was so into Pop Tarts and I was like, eat your Pop Tarts, make your progress with Pop Tarts. And that's how it was born.
That is like such a mind blowing. I don't even know what. There's like 100 questions I have to ask just hearing that story. But like, yeah, one thing that you're saying in there though that I think is like super critical. That's, oh gosh, where do I even go from here, Jess? There's like such a rabbit hole we can go down, because you already know that because there's this double-edged sword of you're out there and you're constantly trying to improve and make progress, right? Because that's how you spend a good part of your day. But also realizing that you are a unicorn already, that there is literally like millions of people trying to do what you have already done, what you did at 16 years old. So there's all these people that are trying to do the same thing, and you've already accomplished that. So you're 16 years old and you have your first business. I did not have a business at 16. I don't know what we were just, oh God, we were so bad at 16, like just trying, getting chased by the cops and
Oh my
uh, just parties and just being just total jackasses. So you're actually, even though you're 22, right? You're 6, 7 years into running and owning your own businesses, and I think that's like a real big key that a lot of the things that I've noticed is people will see someone at a certain age and they'll think that something just kind of clicked like overnight. But the thing about the Pop Tarts, so how long were you doing the Pop Tart thing before it started to like catch on with other people?
Um, maybe like a week or two. It was
Really?
pretty fast. Yeah. And I think because I had the hashtag Pop Tarts and Pump, and I really like, I was so into Pop Tarts. Everything, like when I went to the grocery store, I would just put pictures of the Pop Tarts up, like do little hauls with it. Like I was obsessed.
Right.
So yeah, and I think the hashtag Pop Tarts and Pump was like really catchy. And then I would take a pump picture after it and people would tag me in that as well. So it was just like this little thing. And you want to be reposted on other people's story. It helps
Mm-hmm.
you out. So
Mm-hmm.
it was like a win-win.
So that's kind of like the fascinating part of it is everyone is always trying to hack the algorithm, right? You're
Mhm.
trying to tweak the algorithm, but you were literally just doing it because you're like, man, I love this stuff.
That's literally
Imagine that, right?
yep.
So so you're 16 years old and you're running your own business. My mind is just kind of blown. So how long did that sort of coaching? Because you're coaching people at 16. There's no you have to go through something, and what the other part of what you said I think is really important. You have to go through something and see it through, and you were helped by someone else, and then you go, that's what I want to do for other people. You had that happen at a really young age. That's so the person was a coach of yours.
Yeah. So I had two coaches. My first coach was like a female coach who I originally found on YouTube, and I'm still friends with her to this day. It's Lexi DeYoung, if anybody watching it like knows her. But so when I was earlier in my 15th year, I had my eating disorder. And so I was I didn't even know what an eating disorder was for anything.
Yeah.
Like when I was
Yeah.
going through this, I just knew that I was unwell. And so I was like going on Instagram and I found a lot of inspiration in bodybuilding and I was looking into it. And then I found her YouTube channel and she also had an eating disorder. And then she was also working towards a bodybuilding competition. And I was like, I feel like that's what I need slash want to do to help finally recover myself because I was in pretty bad shape, but I was doing better at that point in
Yeah.
time where like,
Yeah.
I was healthy enough, at least mentally, to know that like I needed to put on weight and like that was a good way to do it. So I ended up reaching out to her and she just helped me a lot with my relationship with food and being okay to eat things like Pop Tarts because during my eating disorder, that was an absolute no go.
Mhm.
And so that's really when it started when I like finally allowed myself to have Pop Tarts. I was like, I need to share this with my Instagram. And then it just became like a daily thing as I got more comfortable eating them. And then my healing inspired my following to eat Pop Tarts. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah. So you're almost like publicly healing, and I think that that's one thing that I can relate to. Where I think people they always feel like they have to have everything all figured out before they use their voice,
Mhm.
and the like spoiler alert, you don't ever have it figured out 100%. So I think people are scared to speak up because they feel like they don't have enough to add to it. But one thing that I've noticed about you that I love is I feel like you're like, if I feel it, I'm just going to say it kind of thing. And, kind of not that there's any like consequences, but you're just like, I'm going to put it out there because you never know. It might resonate with someone else just the same way where someone resonated with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I truly do. I just put it out there, and if it helps one person, if one person sees it who needs to see it, like that's what matters.
Yeah, because so the whole like eating disorder thing,
Hmm.
were you really like heavy? Could you like point to anything that maybe because there's all this social media pressure and things. This
Yeah.
is stuff that I didn't have to deal with. Like we didn't have that. There was not really any we there was bullying a little bit in school, but nothing like really bad. But I feel like the difficult part about the about younger people is like to grow up where there is never really an escape
Hmm.
if you're on social media. Like you can go to school and there's pressure, and then there's pressure within groups, but then you also have social media. It's like you could never actually get away from it and have a break. Was there like any moments that kind of led to the whole issue?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because I never thought of it like that. You just never get a break.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, what a different way to grow up. That must have been nice.
When I there's such a double-edged sword to it. I don't want to say double-edged sword. There's two ways to sort of look at it. One, what you went through. Um, God, I wish I would have. I can't say for sure that I would have reached out and like looked for help, but we just didn't have help. Like
Mhm.
it wasn't talked about. Suicide as teenagers didn't happen. There wasn't eating disorders. Like no one ever talked about stuff like that because, especially back then, I remember being younger and like eating disorders were very frowned upon because they would you would be ridiculed. Like, oh, you have starving kids across the world. That was when like we were realizing that the world there was all these problems kind of going on. So kids were ridiculed if you said you had an eating disorder. They'd be like, oh well, you're just looking for attention, you don't appreciate anything because there's actually kids that are starving around the world, but here you are with all the food in the world and you just don't want to eat or you're going to throw it up afterwards. So it was very highly stigmatized as opposed, it's getting a lot better obviously now.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. It is so interesting how much has changed in such a short period of time, especially in the mental health realm,
Uh-huh.
which is incredible. And it is so great that it has never been easier to get help from anybody at this point in time, which is amazing. So it is very interesting. But what's also very ironic is when I was younger, I was one of those people who made fun of like anorexic people or people at eating
Yeah,
disorders. I was like, that's fake. That's like
it
just
can't be a thing. Yeah,
and and then I
it's
got
like
it.
just eat the food, right? Just go eat the food.
Good.
Yeah.
And like I thought it was fake, like all of that. And I look back now. I mean, of course, I was like, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, but like it was during a time where it was like very on the edge of like, oh, breaking research and but also old ways of thinking. And I just kind of went down that route. And I look back now, I was like, I was so ignorant. But hey, we all can change our beliefs. I'm a big believer of that. But I just think it's very ironic that like a lot of the things that I stand die hard behind now, I was like, when I was younger, I was like, that's fake.
Yeah, I say this, and actually, one of the first things, I started to write, and one of the first things I say in there is, I'm just waiting to do like illustrations and things for the book. But one of the very first things that I say in there is I was like, people always ask me like, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I was like, I wouldn't tell my younger self anything because my younger self would tell me like, I'm not, my younger self wouldn't listen to me. So
That's so full.
I wouldn't give myself any advice. But I think like what you're saying, there's this like weird conversion where I didn't have enough access, and then I think like kids maybe now, growing up the 8, 9, 10, I mean even younger than that, I see they are overwhelmed with too much stuff
Mhm.
too, where you can get so confused maybe the other direction where you're almost I see people kind of fall into this where if you read too much and you can talk yourself into having anything.
Oh,
You know, like
100%.
rather than before, we didn't know we were dealing with it because no one had words for it. Now it's like we have like too many words, for everything. And next thing you know, you're reading an article and you're like, oh man, yeah, I have all that. Oh
Yep.
man, yeah, all right, I have that now. So
I had cold sweats yesterday, and I was convinced I was going to have a heart attack. Like, I was dead convinced.
we've,
We've
all gone on WebMD, and they told us to call 911 immediately.
I was so ready. I was like, I had everything set up to call my mom in case. I was like, this is happening.
That's so funny. One time I actually, I was at work, and I was like probably like mid-20s. And I mean, I was working out a lot and things like that. And I remember I had to go to the hospital because I'm like, I'm having a heart attack.
Oh my
I
gosh.
was 25 years old. So what ultimately happened was, because I did it. I was like, my left arm was like numb, my face was like numb. I'm like, I'm in good shape. I'm like 27. I was like, what the hell is happening to me?
Oh my god.
And so you look on the internet. The first thing you do is you type it in. They're like, you're dying. Call 911. And I'm like, well, I said, you never know if you have like some kind of underlying condition or anything like that. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go to the emergency room. And basically, so I get there, and they told me, they're like, well, what happened was I had a crazy workout that day, and I had like stretched this side of my like muscles, like in my chest and like my trap or whatever, that it was like putting all this pressure and pulling on this over here. So it was all like going numb.
Gosh.
And I'm like, so I'm okay. And they're like, yeah, keep doing whatever it is you're doing. I'm like,
nice story for the bros in the locker room. You'll never believe this, guys.
I worked out so hard, I thought I was dying, like literally.
PR. That's awesome.
So then, after you did the Pop-Tarts and progress and Pop-Tarts, how long did that last? And then, like, how did that sort of phase away?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started it up, like I said, when I was 16. I was just starting competing. So I was getting pretty steady flow of clients. And I ended up scaling that all the way to the point where I was able to move out on my own. Was a year and a half later. That's what
How does that happen?
Well, like, here's the thing. And I look back at that time now, and I'm like almost in awe of myself, and I'm inspired by my old self, because now I'm like looking at everything and I'm over analyzing everything that I do. Like, that version of myself, she was just, because I hadn't had a reason to not believe in myself, that like I couldn't do it. I did everything. Like, and not to say that I didn't have my doubts, and some people, like, everybody at school was making fun of me, but I just, like, nothing didn't work out for me, because I was like, this is fun and this is cool. And I just thought about it as fun and cool, and not as like work and stressful and, oh my God, like, I'm not getting inquiries. I didn't stress. I was like, let's just do some stuff. Yeah. And it ended up working beautifully.
So that's one thing you just said. That's really fascinating about how I didn't really think about that. Where if you're 16, say, and you're starting your own business and you're competing, you are 1000% an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what school you go to.
Oh yeah.
So there would have, because there's so much pressure to conform, especially when you're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of guts to sort of step out of, because I think everyone, even like someone like myself, I've usually been pretty good at like being independent and independently thinking, but still, even me, like, I mean, I was gonna hang out with certain friends and I would go along with what they were doing just because you need to be part of a group when you're in high school. So did you have, maybe because of social media, did that put less pressure that you needed to be in a group, say, with the people immediately around you, because you had support and you had people that understood you maybe online? Did that kind of help?
I think that's a really great question. Isn't high school interesting?
High school is interesting.
I would love to hear your high school stories, because I feel
oh my gosh, I can't tell them here.
We'll save it for the
I've told,
podcast.
Kristen's a police officer, and there's some things I was like, look, I don't know what the statute of limitations are. So I can't tell you about high school.
Oh my God, that's too much. Yeah, that was not me in high school. Not at all. So, actually, funny enough, so when I was never like super popular in high school, I would say. Like, I was with a good group of friends, and it was just a moderate group. But I have a twin brother. So he was like my partner in crime all throughout
Mm-hmm.
all of my school. So I was never really alone. I always had him, and he is one of the coolest kids that I know, and he had his group of friends, and I was always welcome with them. And they would always like look after me and watch after me. So that was, kind of who I would hang out with. But as far as my friends were concerned, I kind of lost all of them when I had my eating disorder, and that's kind of when that started.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of them, but mostly because of me, because when I was in that state, like I wasn't talking to anybody. I didn't talk to my family. I would like lock myself in my room. Like it was a very dark time for me. So it was more so my fault. And then after that, I didn't really try to make amends. When you're young, like
Mm-hmm.
going through something that not a lot of people understand, it's hard to apologize for behavior. So yeah, I was just like, at that point in time, once I recovered, once I was competing, I was so happy and excited for what I was doing. I was like, I don't care. I just want to be doing this. So I was pretty okay with just doing my own thing.
Oh man, that one, what you just said hit home pretty hard, because I think one of the things you always hear is, people will reach out to you and they'll say, or they'll tell you like, oh, talk to someone. And part of the thing that I was writing about, and part of like what you said that makes so much sense, is you don't know what to say. Like if someone were to ask you to describe what you're going through, you're not talking because you don't want to talk. You don't know how to say it, like how to put it into words. So how can you get help if you can't even explain what's going on with you? How can you possibly explain it to someone else if you don't understand it? So yeah, that was, when you said that made a lot of sense, because it's like you would love to get it out there, but it's just not possible.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I'm like just now finding words to like describe my eating disorder when I was 15. And like,
Hmm.
as of that, a lot of tension in my family was created. And like, I used to just blame it all on them for not helping me. And now I'm like, the script is flipped. Like, I didn't know how to ask for help, and I have to take accountability for that. And then also, I have to like now communicate, like, hey, let's all come back together and, and
Yeah.
mend these wounds a little bit. But it is
Mhm.
very interesting.
Was there anything that happened? So, say between where you were 16, 15, 16, going through this, and where you are now, was there time periods in there where because if you don't understand what's going on with you, sometimes you will get very down on yourself. You think that there's something wrong with you because other people aren't going through this and other people don't understand you. So you're like, I'm I'm kind of the problem here, where there's something wrong with me. Did you go through periods where you sort of lost maybe confidence in yourself, or you thought maybe there was something wrong with you, and then maybe eventually figured out you're like, wow, actually there was something good that was going on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's kind of funny because I feel like that's almost an everyday struggle because of what I went through. And maybe you can relate to that. Like that
Yes.
thought is always in the back of my head. Like, am I the problem? like, you
Yeah.
know, like, did they not say that, or did they say it that way because they don't like me? Like, were they trying to frame me? Like, did I do something wrong? And like
Hmm.
everything that happens, I always automatically assume it's like my fault first, or like I'm the one who caused a problem, or like every time.
Yeah. So that would be, because it would be a tough thing, like, for your parents to go through too, because if you don't understand how to explain it to your parents probably don't understand. They just see you maybe as being an angsty teenager that's locking herself in a room, and she's, it might be oh, well, she's just going through a phase or something like that. But you're going through something a lot more serious, but
Mhm.
it's nobody's fault necessarily that you can't come together on it. It's just such a differing sort of perspective on it.
Exactly. Yeah. And like my parents weren't very educated in mental health, like I said.
Yeah.
So it was just very like unaware. And my parents actually didn't know until because I was still pretending to eat and all that. So they didn't really know. They just thought,
Mm.
like I looked pretty okay in my baggy clothes. It's the middle of winter, so I don't look that skinny, Um, and I used to ride horses actually for like 8 years or so when I was younger. And I had to stop because the saddle like hurt when I sat on it because I was so
Mm.
thin. And
Mm.
I stopped going for a pretty long period of time. And then one day it was like getting warmer outside, and I was like, okay, I could do this. And I walked to go to my lesson, and I walked in the barn, and my instructor looked at me and she was like, "Are you okay?"
Ooh.
I was like, "Yeah, I'm totally fine." And like she hadn't seen me since I was probably 35 pounds heavier. So like my cheekbones were sunken in. I was like 80 something pounds. And she like took it super slow. She stopped the lesson early and she like pulled my parent, I think it was my mom who picked me up at that day, pulled her aside and like talked to her about everything. And I feel like that's when like the wheels started turning of like, okay, something is a little bit serious going on here.
Hmm. And then you ended up flipping the whole script and turning it into a successful business.
Yeah, for the most part. And it kind of ended up just like that.
Well, and I think too, like one of the other things that you just said that is something I think about all the time is I make mention in a lot of the stuff I was writing about that you will have a breakthrough or
Mhm.
something like that. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you wake up and the clouds part and there's this, you hear the music playing and the rainbow comes out or everything. It's going to be something that's always with you. I think that's one thing that I've noticed, that no matter how far removed you are from it, it's still, but it doesn't have to be. Learning how to use it as momentum rather than something that sort of holds you back. You can control the relationship that you have with it, and then it kind of ties into maybe what I've noticed about. I could be wrong, but it seems like you sort of have gone through almost like a soft reboot again of your process. You're like,
Yeah.
I think because you started a new Instagram account, but it was more than that. It was like
Mhm.
you maybe became like very focused on a couple things that you had been trying out, and you were like go full bore like on a couple things. So anyway, talk me through that. Was that the plan? It was like, okay, I've done all these things, I've got all this experience the last few years. Now I'm going to focus on like a couple things and kind of soft reboot myself, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, I'm in my early 20s, so I'm just trying to figure out who I am. And,
Well, it doesn't get, it doesn't change.
I feel
Yeah.
like every year or so, I just have a quarter life crisis moment. Like you said, you just like have these epiphanies.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's different for everybody, but I do feel that there are significant points in your time or in your life, usually when you're at like all time lows or all time highs, where a really, really big shift happens. And those are always monumental points in your life, right? And so when I made that new Instagram, that was actually like an all-time low moment for me. That was like, and that was like the beginning of going on the ups. So,
Well, because you've gone through that before, that
mhm,
you can recognize the signs that this isn't that's one of the key things I think you learn through these types of processes, that when you get really down or things get really, you're able to flip that
mhm,
because you've already been through it. You've already beaten this a couple times. You're going, I recognize what's going on now, and I'm not going to, self-destruct.
mhm.
This means if I stay at it, something different or something big is going to happen. But you're not waiting around. You have to like take those steps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, I'm so glad I've had so many struggles. Like, looking back at it, I'm like, I'm well equipped for anything that happens. Like, do not
Mhm.
try me. I can manage. But yeah, so it was actually last year. My business was going great. I had several employees. Wonderful. Everything was scaled well. I was really excited about it. I had a lot of that money was going to, my supplements. So I was able to start that brand, had my coaching business. Everything was fabulous, flying colors. I was like enjoying everything. And I was really at the high of what started Pop Tart business. Like, that's where it grew to. And it was awesome. And everything up until that point worked out every single time until last year, probably around this time. And I lost pretty much everything in the course of a week. So I had to let go of my employees and I had to part ways. With that, probably I'd say 75% of my clientele also had to part ways.
Mhm.
So I was left with a business that was making significant money to a business that was making barely enough for me to even pay my bills, like
Mhm.
barely enough. And this all happened and I let it happen. And I had, quite a bit of money saved up and I had my supplements going. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to stress. It's all good. It's all going to work out. Like, maybe that's for the best. And it ended up being for the best, because those employees, they weren't in alignment with me anymore. And I was like, all right, no problem. And then like a month later, I turned 21. And you know me, I've been a goody two shoes my whole life. I was like,
Mhm.
let's have some fun. Like, now's my time. I don't have a lot of clients. My business, I'll just start it next month, or I'll start doing that again next month. And like, this was me, like, resting after years of grinding to get my business to where it was. And I felt that it was justified until I did that for several months. And then in December, I was making not even half enough to cover my bills. So at that point in time, bank accounts exhausted, credit cards maxed, bills not being paid,
Mhm.
couldn't go home for Christmas because I couldn't afford a flight. And I was like, oh goodness, like, this is not good at
Yeah.
all. And so that was the moment where I really had to like reach that to finally kind of look back and actually address the business situation that happened, because the reason why I never started again, because I stopped believing in myself. And that's why I look back at my old version of myself. I'm like, she built that business out of Pop Tarts and you did it before, and now you're sitting here crying thinking you can't do it, and you
Mhm.
have years of experience. I was like, get your head out of your behinds. Like, come on. But the
Mhm.
mental has so much to do with it, because
Yeah.
I couldn't, because I didn't believe in myself. And yeah, then I just had like a huge epiphany, and and everything's going great again.
It's just crazy. I mean, first of all, that's just thank you for being so transparent about it, because
Oh,
I think so many people are afraid to talk about. Um, I get, because people will say things like, "Oh, social media, don't believe it. It's not real," but they don't tell you why.
mhm.
But we all know, because if you go through it and you see other people, it's why, like, if you tell that story to, there's so many things that you just said that I need to talk about. First thing, one of the things you said. So the book that I'm writing, it's called The Liar Inside, right? And
Oh, I love it
you have this thing, and you had that, right, where you're like, shut the fuck up. I've done this before. Stop lying to me, right? Kind of
yeah.
thing. You're like, I've already, stop trying to tell me something that, but we allow ourselves to convince ourselves of something that's not true, even though
Mhm.
you've already done it. Sometimes you just have to kind of reboot and look at it and go, yeah, you've done this before. Like, stop, stop. But it's hard to explain what you went through to people, that if you go on the traditional path and it's like every year you have people try to have this incremental progress, just a little bit. Hopefully maybe you get a big promotion at some point, but you're just trying to make your 3% cost of living increase every year, and hopefully you can work up far enough. And that is not how this works.
Mm-hmm.
You have these huge ups and huge downs. And when you go through the downs, you don't even really want to admit it, because you, first of all, you feel like a failure, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because, and you don't want to even tell other people that would probably understand what you're going through, because it's just such a hard thing to admit. So it's like almost you won't even admit it to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because you just don't want to pretend it's happening, even though, as you're saying, the key to getting through it is recognizing it, acknowledging it, because the only way you can figure out how to get out of it is if you sit down and you turn it into a thing, and you look at that thing and go, okay, now I have to fix you. But if you're like afraid to talk about it or afraid to admit it, you can't get to it to kind of change it.
Yeah. And I will say you're spot on with that. And I just told my family about that last month.
I
And they,
can't do it. Right. I'm shocked that you did tell them.
yeah, they were like, we would have helped you. But I was like, and
Mhm.
throughout that year, I rarely like texted my family, called them, because I didn't want to talk to them, because all I can think about was like, I'm a failure, I'm a failure, I'm a failure. Like they're gonna know, they're gonna know. And that's
Mhm.
all I could think about. So I wouldn't message them, I wouldn't text them. And like that really damaged our relationship further, because I'm in Texas and they live in Pennsylvania. It's a long ways away. So I really learned through that, like the only person who thinks you're failing is yourself. Truthfully, the only
True.
person.
Yeah.
No one else thinks you're failing. Everyone else is like looking at you and either trying to help you find a solution, but no one's like, you suck. Like no one thinks that.
Yeah. That's
So
true, because everybody kind of recognizes it, right?
yeah. And it's just like people see your failures as still on some sort of milestone, because like you never go back to knowing nothing, or like you always know something or have something that you can do. Like you're never at complete zero. Never. And so I kept using my failure as like, or like my failure, okay, we'll say this, as like this crutch. And I was like, just like your failure is still like where your 15-year-old self would have been so excited to be. Like I was like, I'm living in dream.
Mm.
What am I
Yeah.
doing? Like
Yeah.
I can't be sad. And it just, but you do, like you said, that liar inside, it just convinces you that you suck. Like, don't try that again. And yeah, I would spend my days, in my bed. And like, I used to have so much work ethic when I was younger, and I like this all I wanted to do. And then that one moment, and I didn't realize like that was my time to keep going. And instead, I just threw in the towel. I just gave up.
Mhm. Because I think like one thing that it's like the way this process, at least it seems to me, and just from hearing that story and just knowing other people that kind of go through it, you're sort of going through this process like in chunks. It's almost like chapters of a book, right? Where you're you got to the end of this chapter and you're like, okay, sometimes we hang on to that story for just a little bit too long, and you're like, you sort of exhaust all possibilities, and then you have to start over. But you're starting over with a lot more experience, a lot more tools. So even though it might feel, especially financially, when you look at it financially, sometimes you're like, wow,
Oh yeah.
you're like, that was a disaster. But you're sort of,
Two margaritas.
yeah, now you're going back out there just more equipped to go to another level next time. Because a lot of people will stay, you stay in abusive relationships, or you stay in bad business relationships, or whatever it is. You stick around too long because you feel like you're too invested
Mhm.
to leave. And that's one of the things, because I went through the same thing too, where you sort of build something that maybe you didn't even necessarily set out to do, and then next thing you know, you find yourself on this path, and you're going, nah, but now I can't turn back, because I've already invested too much into this, financially locked in. And then you stop, and exactly what you said, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, you've done this like 10 times in the last like 4 years, where you've just taken the Etch-a-Sketch and like shaken it out and started over again. Like,
Yeah.
what are you even talking about? Like, and that's actually what started when I literally woke up at like 3 in the morning with you, um, woke up and just started to write about it, because I'm like, what are you even saying to yourself in your own head? I woke up at like 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning one time, and my brain would not stop agonizing about how much I have failed everything.
Yes.
And my future, I have no future because, this went wrong. And I'm like, but you've gone through this like 100 times. What are you even talking about? So that's kind of what led to the whole getting it out of your system, because it's like, because it was sitting there behind me and I was not acknowledging it. And then when I sat down and I wrote it out and I looked at it, I'm going, man, what are you even talking about? You know?
Yeah, and it's always like that. Like when it stays in your head, it just becomes so like over exaggerated, and it's just, and I like to use this with my clients, for example, because starting a fitness journey, it's like, oh my gosh, like you don't want to fail, right? And that's like a big thing. Like I failed so many times, like I don't want to fail again. Why would I start again? I'm like, okay, let's say you do fail. Like, what would you do? And they're like, well, I would just try again. Boom, let's start.
Right.
We're
Imagine
good
that.
to go.
Yeah.
That's all you need. You just need to try again. Like it's not, and we make it this big deal. And it's just like the more I fail, the more I'm like, man, that wasn't that serious. Like, let's try again.
Yeah. What else? What other choice do you have?
Exactly.
I think like the gym too is, do you find, so getting into like your coaching, so now because you're competitive, do you coach people that are more in trying to get in competitions, or because it seems like you're very much also into, I'm not going to use the term life coach. It's
Mhm.
like, it's just too cringe sometimes, but would you say that you have like different types of people that come along, or do you have sort of a niche that you kind of work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a such great variety of clients, and I'm so grateful to have such a big variety of clients, from young clients to older clients, middle-aged clients, moms, competitors. I have such a wide range. Former athletes, current athletes, like amazing range of clients. And the only like requirements that I have for people that I work with, I want them to be female, and I just want them to
Mhm.
have a purpose. That's all I want. I just want you to have a purpose in whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Because if you have a purpose, and if I didn't want to work with all female athletes, like all you need is a purpose, and that's all I'm looking for. Like I just want a reason why, and I just want to know on that first phone call that it's enough to push you through the really hard times. And if I feel that, that's all I need, and they get the results themselves.
Yeah, because you'll run into people, sometimes that, I mean, no matter what facet of life you're in, you'll run into people that they start to say what they want, and you can already tell that they're not in it. You can recognize the language. And that was one thing like I noticed about you. I've used this analogy a lot. I, it makes so much sense to me, but it'll only make sense to other people that kind of get it. But
Uh-huh.
I think sometimes, especially when I was younger and we didn't have social media, you were basically just stuck with the kids in your neighborhood and the people, your family, and things like that. I said sometimes, and even now, even with social media, it can be the same thing. When you're going through it, it's like you're in a foreign country and you're walking around and you don't speak the language, and so you might be trying to communicate with people and they can't understand you. You know what you want to say. You've like, I'm looking for this place, like I feel it in my soul, but they're looking at you like you're speaking a different language, and then they try to tell you something and you can't understand it. And then it's like you hear someone off in the distance, right, and you hear that they're speaking the same language as you, and you just naturally like, oh, I recognize that. So you start to gravitate towards other people, because that's how I felt when I was listening to like some of your stuff, because we met through when you were going to launch your supplement line. we connected, and then I remember seeing some of your content and the language that you were using and things you were describing. Details are different from person to person, but there's a universal recognition of language in other people that you hear it and you go, that person has gone through some things, similar situations, and that we can have conversations about it. It doesn't matter, how old someone is, how young they are. So it's probably like the same thing, like when you're talking to your clients, there's like almost, without simplifying too much, there's just a language that sort of connects and clicks, and then you hear it in them, they probably hear it in you too, and that kind of brings you guys together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like one of the biggest, because I try to give advice on coaching to other coaches as much as I can. Like I'll never claim to be a business coach by any means, but I've been around the wheelhouse. Like I like to give advice where I can. And yeah, that's one of the things that I always try to mention. I'm like, just talk on your stories, because like the way you talk, your posture, the energy that you put off when you're talking, no one can feel that when you're typing. I'm like, no one knows. But when you talk, like people will connect with your vibration, your energy, whatever you want to say, or they'll hear a certain word, and then it's just this, downward effect. And then what do you know? Next thing, everybody's applying to you. And like the period of time where I was not focusing on my business, all I did was type on my stories like a couple days a week because I was just pretty drained. And I didn't get any inquiries from that. And usually I just get inquiries because I, was posting on Instagram and stuff. But I noticed a direct, what's the word? Correlation? Yes. A direct correlation between when I talk on my stories and when I don't, of like people signing up or inquiring or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, you're so right. You just kind of feel it, and you just get that you just get that vibe. I don't know how to explain it, but everybody knows. It's like the sixth sense.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that that's what I think too. I appreciate, like, with what you do is I'm almost like, if I feel it anymore, or like, because there's times where you kind of like doubt yourself, and kind of like what you're talking about. You're like, what I'm saying, do people really care? Does it matter? Kind of thing. Like, am I really reaching anyone, or whatever your goal is? Like, is it you kind of go through the ups and downs, but then it's really cool when you find it again and you remember, and you kind of go, yes, I am good at this. This is, what I mean? I do, have this thing that is not everybody has that, or they're so afraid. I think people are so scared of their own voices sometimes. I don't ever judge someone for this, because I'm sure I felt the same way, because I remember telling people this story where, even not that long ago, you if you had to give like a presentation or a speech or something like that, like in front of the class, or at a job or whatever, it was the most horrifying thought in the world for me. I remember, even so, I graduated from college way later in life. I was laid off from the company I was at, and then I went back to school during that time. Long story short, we had to do a speech during one of the classes, and I remember getting the syllabus, and I'm like, oh man, and it's like months away, and I'm already freaking out about it. You're like sweating because you have to do this thing. But by the time, and I started to do Instagram things at the time, like a little bit later, and now I swear to God, I tell people this. I was like, if they ask me like tomorrow to like go on and talk with the president or whoever on live television, I'd be totally fine.
That's so
it's like the same person that, I mean, like literally, it was like debilitating fear, because you're so scared of your own voice, and you're so scared of being judged by people. And kind of like one thing you said earlier about the judgment, you're so worried about it. People really, I mean, yeah, there's a few, whatever, people are just weird, but people aren't judging you. People don't, what I've noticed too is like, people, when they're public speaking or whatever, they're so worried about looking foolish and all this other stuff. When people are watching someone else speak, I am rooting for them so hard, and so is everyone else. No one wants you to look like a fool. And I think when we stand up there and we go, these people are all waiting for me to make a mistake, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel like, I feel like you've definitely found your life passions, or you're like on that path. You're writing your book, which I didn't know you're writing that. Congratulations. That's
Oh
amazing.
yeah, yeah,
That's,
yeah.
oh yeah, that's so
Oh, we
great.
talked about that. Yeah, yeah,
That's so great. No, it's amazing. Um, and so I feel like a lot of being confident in public speaking and not being afraid of looking like a fool is just knowing your truth and being true to you and your purpose, and why you're on this earth. And when you know that, it doesn't matter if you look like a fool, because you're like,
yeah.
I'm doing it in my truth, and you don't care after that. So, I feel like the lack of personal development education is like a real reason, and healing, to be honest, is like a real reason why things like being scared of big groups of people and being afraid of judgment is like such a big issue. Because I'm like, if people were all confident in who they were, it just, because they healed, to me, it wouldn't be an issue.
Wouldn't be
That's
an
just my
issue.
opinion. Very open to other opinions, though.
Yeah. No, I agree with you because, and I tell people this all the time too. Like if I'm ever talking to someone and I can tell they have a lot to say, but they don't know how to say it, and I'll tell them, I'm like, I don't even need you to make sense.
Hmm.
Just start saying things,
Yeah.
and that's how the basically the book that I wrote, it started off as a word vomit journal of getting the shit that was in my head that night out.
Hmm.
But what happened was it made me go back to so many things that now I'm doing good, things are good, but there was a lot of details that I was leaving out of these experiences that I've never really gone back and looked at. And the more I did it, I was like, man, because sometimes I make the analogy in the book too. I said, say when people go to therapy or you go through this where you just start talking about it. I said sometimes it's like, taking the puzzle box, right? And you dump out all the puzzle pieces. It's like you get it out, but now you just have this table covered of puzzle pieces everywhere. And now you gotta make the border, and then you gotta find the flowers, hopefully, that go together, right? And the picture that goes in. But it's like just you dump it out, but now you gotta line everything up
Hmm.
to make any kind of sense out of anything. So it kind of sounds like that's what you're kind of doing at the same time too.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just part of the fun of life, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, just what it's about. And don't get me wrong, it's like really difficult to find safe spaces to like talk about, experiences or like things you want to say. It's like really hard to find someone who you trust to talk about that. But I'm like, the the issue is that most people, and like myself included, for a long time, all of last year, I didn't even trust myself, and like that's where you can get in trouble, when you can't like sit down and, like you said before, like admit to yourself, hey, we gotta figure this out, like this ain't working.
So do you ever, because that's one of the things too, is that whole the practice of just talking, just saying things and like putting it out there. And you don't even necessarily have to, writing in journals and things like that is good. Um, but also using your voice. Like I encourage people a lot of times too, like don't even necessarily, it's not, you don't necessarily have to post everything, but it's always good to hear your own voice and to really love the sound of your own voice. Because one of the things I hear people that I think is just so sad, but I don't judge them for it because they'll get through it. But you hear them say like they hate the sound of their own voice.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that is such a sad thing to hear because that same person that's saying that, I'm like, our voices are unique to us, right? It's like it's like a fingerprint, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, the same person that's saying they don't like the sound of their voice. I was like, there's other people that that just want to hear the sound of your voice,
Mhm.
whether it's someone in your family, your close friend, or something like that. I said, so sometimes just just start talking, like listening to yourself and getting to know the sound of your own voice, because like that's one thing I love that you do is you're like you don't you don't curate your content perfectly to have everything set up and I have this perfect thought that I'm going to throw out there. You just You're just talking like that. I do the same thing. I'm just like, I don't think when people ask me questions and stuff like that, I just start talking. Next thing you know, I'm talking about I don't know, who knows? But I never edit anything. Like I never reshoot anything. I just, there it is. And then I go back and watch it sometimes and I'm like, what the hell am I talking about?
Yep, all the time. And I am very lucky that I've always been a very talkative, like extrovert type person. I'm an introverted extrovert, I would say, but I'm very talkative. And I feel that because I started this at such a young age, it's just so second nature to me now. Like, I couldn't even tell you, like, how I got to this point or how I started. If I was nervous to be on camera, I probably was, to be honest. Like, it's very new. But also, when I was younger, I pretended on my phone to have a YouTube channel and I would record myself like making little DIY bracelets and I would narrate them as I was going. So I've always
Oh
been
my God.
someone. Oh,
That is amazing.
it's
Wait, how old were you?
probably like 7 or 8.
What the
Like, I
hell?
was so young on my little iPod Touch, and I had it on a duct tape tripod.
So I was out like eating dirt in the backyard. Uh, so you were making YouTube video. Okay.
I
Yeah,
was doing my best for friendship bracelets. So I feel like it's always kind of been in me, but I think that's great advice for anybody is just like getting used to talking. And I use the voice notes on my phone or the voice memos on my phone. When I'm out walking sometimes and I have a thought or especially when something's kind of on my mind and it's been bothering me a little bit, I will just talk to myself on my phone until everything leaves my system and I'll listen to it back. And not only does that help me like process everything, but it does. I'm like listening and I'm, catching words that I say that that didn't make sense there. Or you just kind of are able to audit yourself in ways that are more privately than ways that you post on the internet and then feel silly about. So I think that's a really great idea, whether you want to be on the internet or not. 110% listen to your voice. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one thing too that I've really been trying to make myself be better at is it's kind of second nature for you now because you've been doing it for such a long time. But because one of the things that I'm bad at is, when your brain, we've had this conversation before where your brain just does not shut up sometimes. And you're just like, I am so tired of me right now. I'm so tired of my own brain. But you have these thoughts, and like a thought will come up. You do a lot of internal monologue. We had that internal monologue
Yes.
conversation
Oh my
when you
gosh.
mentioned that there people that don't have internal monologues. I'm like,
I
there's
still
no way.
can't comprehend that.
No way. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. That's
My
impossible.
internal monologue usually becomes external. Like, I'll just start talking to
Yes.
myself with what I'm saying up here.
Because you have to have like a release valve, because there's like too much, or your like head will explode like with the internal monologue. But like the one thing that I've been trying to do is because I'll internal monologue something
Mhm.
and I'll get really, makes you sound like a psychopath. And I'll get really excited about something going on in my own head, right? And I'm like, oh, I'll record a video later on that, or I'll do something with that. But you like kind of wear yourself out a little bit. It's out when you think about it. And then like later on when you go to do it, I don't remember what the hell I was talking about.
Every time.
Right. So that's what I've been trying to do a better job. And now you're reminding me, make sure I continue to do that, is in the moment. You don't necessarily have to post it or anything like that, but just say it, write it down, do something. And next thing you know, you see this pattern of kind of thoughts and things that kind of come out of your head. And that's how the book sort of started to come about. And I started to reorganize it into coherent thoughts that actually hopefully have some kind of structure to it. So that's good practice, is voice memos to yourself, whether it's writing it down or actually saying. I would prefer to say it, out loud and hearing the sound of your own voice, because I've seen so many people that I've known on social media that were hesitant to get on camera, or they were hesitant to talk or anything, and then you see them kind of go through it, and next thing you know, they're doing a second nature, and you're just like, that is just so cool to watch.
Yay. Yeah, I do think that's really cool.
That's a good idea too, where if you have a notebook to write in every location that you have. Yeah, that is a good idea because right, sometimes it's just gone. It's just
Mhm.
gone. Like when you and you're like, oh, I'll remember. It's kind of like, oh, I'll remember this when I leave the house, and you just walk out. Kind of what
Yeah.
happened.
And like our day and age is so distracted. Like I'll walk into a room and I forget why I'm there. Like who's to say I'm going to remember my ideas? And like our best ideas are usually when we're doing random things. Like you don't even think about it. So,
Mine
yeah,
are always at like 2:30 in the morning when I'm trying to sleep.
it's like, come on,
Always.
Brian, not now.
Yeah, I wake up and I was like, if I could be as productive all throughout my day as my brain is at say 3 a.m. I'm like I would be, but only while I'm trying to sleep. Like
Hmm.
if I'm wide awake, then it doesn't work. But if I'm dead asleep, I wake up. I'm like the amazing ideas that I've come up with at like 3 in the morning that I'm just too tired to get on. I was like, if I could just harness that, everything would be good.
It's your power hour. It's your
It
time to
really is. So
go.
that is one thing. So do you ever notice that you're like, because one thing I talk about that's really nice about somewhat controlling your own schedule is you have certain times a day where you're more productive, you're just better. Is that like kind of what you find about yourself? Or are you just like certain times a day you're like, look, I know that I'm not going to be able to get much production done like brain wise?
Oh yeah, 110%. I follow like I would say a pretty traditional structure. I'm most productive in the morning because I just love mornings. They're my favorite. And I would say like up until like 4 or 5 p.m., I'm not getting anything done after that. Like
Right.
zero. I will stare at my computer for 4 straight hours before I type a single letter. Like there's nothing coming out of this brain anymore.
So you have this next phase that you're kind of in
Mhm.
that I've noticed anyway. What is it? Project Empower? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so this one is I don't want to mess it up. I'm thinking about Pop Tarts.
Yeah.
Project no project too many P's. Project Progress, and then I have the Empowered Empire as well.
Yeah. Alliteration is I love alliteration.
Big
So
thing for me. Love my
yeah,
big letters.
yeah. So what is that about? What is and this is something new?
Yeah. So, Project Progress is like my rebranded coaching business. So
Hmm.
instead of the Pop Tarts, this is the new coaching business. And I have like a whole brand book with it that I'm very, very excited about. So essentially, it's about like making yourself your number one project, right? Like projects are things that you work on every single day to get done. And so it's you becoming your own project that's always a work in progress because you're never finished. And so Project Progress right now is just like a coaching business, but I have a lot bigger goals for it. So it's just going to continue to grow and serve more and more women across the world and just make a really big impact in the world. That's like my goal. And then the Empowered Empire is just like the people within that and just the community within
Mm.
that is what I really want that to be is just the people that are progressing, even if they're not a part of the program. I just want a bunch of women who are ready to change themselves and thus change a world because that's how it starts. That's what I want that to be. I just want it to be a awesome group of people.
Yeah, that and there's no. That's the good thing is the way we're sort of set up now is you can connect with so many people, and there's no shortage of amazing people. I'm always like I say it all the time, but the thought process I had behind creating the app and then creating the Facebook group to go with it, it is because that's kind of part of it too. Like with someone that you've seen it before, right? And you plan, you have a plan, but also that weird recognition that you have where you go, yeah, I have a plan and it's good to be a planner and we wake up and we're regimented, but also being able to like let go of the plan when it
Yes.
decides to do something else, and you can pivot kind of quickly to go, okay, we need to move in this direction now. So it's like that weird dynamic of, this is my vision, this, because vision is everything. Vision is the buzzword for all of us, right? It's like, you have to have this vision, but then the vision changes, and it's that ability to sort of adapt and kind of move forward when that vision sort of changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think that's just the coolest thing about what we do, and just another reason why you literally can never fail. Just change your mind. And I said that um on the reel I posted the other day. I was like, the only difference between like trying a different way, or, starting over, like, which we consider to be okay, versus failing, is like whether or not it was your choice. Like, you choose to try it a different way because, you did it, but you think you could do it better. But failing is like when a source outside of your control causes you to have to try again. But I'm like, that's always working in your favor either way. Like, starting over will never hurt you. It won't, because like we said before, you got more tools now, and now you have an opportunity to do it better or differently, or
Yeah,
something really different.
I think that's something too. I don't even think we necessarily believe in that concept of starting over, um, because you're not. You just know that you're starting again.
Yeah,
Maybe that's a better way to put it, because
yeah,
it's like, I remember, going through that process, and I already, after going through wiping the slate clean and starting over a few times, then I got things to, what changed for me, being able to recognize when you have that epiphany or that moment, right? So mine was, so on my birthday, and this is what I started writing about, but on my birthday, that day that I made the Instagram video, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to post it or not, but it was the first time I had acknowledged the suicide attempt. So this was about 23 years when I attempted suicide when I was 17. I didn't acknowledge it or recognize it or even allow myself to admit that it happened. There was just so much shame and weirdness that was attached to it. I didn't even acknowledge it to myself until my 40th birthday. And I remember getting up that day, and I had all these like amazing people and messages and stuff that people had reached out, and my closest friends had made this like video montage of all these video messages and things like that. And I remember just like crying my eyes out, right? And I remember going to the gym later on that day, and what I said was, I said, dude, thank God you didn't do that. Thank God you're still here, that you got to see this. And it was the first time that I had ever acknowledged that it happened. And I tell you that was a different person after that moment. Everything changed. And the way I describe it is, I didn't realize, going back to something you were saying earlier that I wanted to talk about, where I realized that I was not a whole person the last 20 years, because I left a part of me behind because I refused to acknowledge that it happened. I had left this part of me back there, and I finally caught up with myself and sort of got back to it, and I was like, and everything looked different to me after that. Every business opportunity, every relationship, everything, even down to my wife at the time and my business. And I remember after that, I changed, and she was like, this is not the person that I married. And I was like, you're not, I get it. And so I said, well, all right, I'm going to start over again, because I'm just a different person. And you recognize that too. When you have kind of like one of those moments, you're like, okay, I'm just differently equipped now. And now I'm going to go over here. So it's like, you're just sort of starting again, starting a new chapter. So anyway, I could talk forever about
No,
that.
that
But
was amazing. I'm so glad
what
you shared that. And I highly encourage like anybody watching this from my following to watch the video that he posted, because it was very touching. And it was amazing. It was incredible.
it was one of those things where, like I said, so, and maybe this could be something too that maybe you relate to, when you have to kind of go through the shame of like an eating disorder or something like that. It always is because you're punishing yourself for some reason. right? And then you have to acknowledge that you're punishing yourself, and then you kind of got to get through it. So there's this like multi-step process that I had to go through, not only acknowledging it, and then I realized, okay, now I acknowledge it to myself. I was like, but I need to tell people around me about this. That's like the next step, like you mentioned with your family, trying to, because I'm like, I felt bad for people that have known me for a long time. I was like, you've never really known me. Like that's kind of one thing I realized. I was like, you've never known the whole person that I am. And so I started to record that video, and I'm like, there's no way, I'm like emotional and I'm like saying all stuff. I was like, there's no way I'm putting this on social media. And you know what I did? I got done recording that video, and I like immediately hit post, and it was too late.
That's what you got to do sometimes.
Yeah. So, and then everything changed after that. The people that I met that day for the first time, basically, are people that are still in my life now. And it's just amazing when you have like just, a couple seconds of that courage to just do it and kind of let it go, how much stuff can change. And I see it with you too all the time. So I always kind of resonate with that.
That's amazing. I actually have a tattoo. It's my favorite quote. It's on my shoulder. It says 20 seconds. And it's from the movie We Bought a Zoo, which is my favorite movie in the world.
I love that movie.
Oh, it's so good. It makes I will cry.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the quote is, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something good will come of it. And that's all you need. You just need 20 seconds to like just say that word, get that out. Like that's all you need. And I also hope that with your story, anybody who is like struggling with, a past event that they have to, like you said, kind of have that meeting point, as someone who has had that point, you're living your life right now and it feels out of alignment because you haven't realized that the past version of yourself is still holding on to a piece of you. So like, I hope that you can use this as some sort of like hope and just some sort of catalyst to start trying to find that other guy's path back to you so you can have that moment and find your peace ultimately.
Yeah, because you did it a lot faster than I did. And that's like one thing, you don't have any regrets or anything like that, but it's hard not to think about it, where the sooner you can, and it's easy to say, right? Because again, I still, honestly, for the life of me, like when I think about it, I still couldn't really tell you why. Why? I still really don't know why. And I'm kind of good with that, good with not understanding. But what happens too is then sometimes we look back and we have too many regrets about time, or should I have done this? And that stuff's all over with. So it's like, you can only do what but I think that's sometimes why I feel like such a baby sometimes now, because I really feel like just 3 years ago was the start of my life, which is so weird to say, but some people never really start their lives, which is, unfortunate. You'll go through your entire life without really ever seeing it. And then that's why you can kind of recognize other people that have gone through that, and you can hear that language, because you're like, oh, you've had to put yourself back together again, and sort of go forward, and then you can hear it in somebody else.
Wow, that just
I'm going to turn the camera off. Like when you start talking about like We Bought a Zoo, I should have turned the camera feed off, because that movie is so emotional.
I'll start bawling my eyes
right. Gonna have a good old cry fest.
Oh my god.
So one thing that I want to talk about too before
absolutely
we jump off. So one thing that I always struggle with, and I'm curious, is like, do people ever ask you if you have a 5-year plan or like a 10-year plan?
Yeah, that's probably like the number one question I get asked. Is like, so what's next? Or like, what do you, what's your business going to grow into, and things like that.
Yeah.
That's usually like the most common question.
That is literally my cat is in my supplement stash, and he just knocked everything over.
Oh, dude. He's still going.
All right. So Anyway, 5-year plan. So my 5-year plan is now I got to pick all that shit up because it's literally everything that you just knocked over. And
His
that's
mess,
going to take.
you can clean it up.
That's your kid. It was everything. Okay. Anyway,
Oh,
5-year, 10-year plan. How do you approach that kind of? Because that question messes me up completely.
yeah, and I think everybody approaches it a little bit differently. I think for me, I am so okay with pivoting that I'll just lay it out. I'm like, yeah, this is like about what I want to do. And every single time I say it, it changes. It's never the same. And I'm okay with that. It's like, because every time I say it, I'm like, oh, well, that's a cool new idea. Like maybe that one. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so hard to have conversations with a lot of people is, they go, like, I'll use this example. My dad still to this day, I'm like, Dad, get it through your head. Like, man, he asked me the other day, he's like, so, son, I mean, it was literally like 2 years ago. He asked me how I provide for myself. I'm like,
Okay.
I was like, I haven't worked for anybody in years, but because I don't have a job, like a job, a 9 to 5, but he asked me the other day, he's like, so are you taking the money that you make and like putting it in like a retirement account? And I'm just like, dude, we are so far apart on these conversations we're having. Because
Uh,
if I tell him I don't have a 5-year plan, like
mhm.
I could say, like we have our vision board with
Oh, for sure.
we're an idea of what we want to do, but
I got
5 years, I'm like, it was last week. Within this last week, I decided to make my own supplement. Brain is in like a brain health line. I decided today that I'm going to do that. Or it was yesterday morning, so I decided to do
That's
that.
amazing.
I wrote that book. I did like so. I'm like, 2 weeks ago I didn't have anything on my radar. I was like, but once it pops in your head, you just do it.
Yeah.
But then you go through those periods of time too, where you're just kind of those are like kind of the tough parts is when you're not really doing anything.
Hmm.
You're kind of like find yourself going through the motions, and sometimes it's necessary to kind of tread water a little bit, but it kind of freaks you out, right? Because you're like, you feel like you're not making progress sometimes.
Yes, I agree with that. And it's very unsettling, especially when you are in charge of, being productive to continue to make money. It's very
Mm-hmm.
unsettling. But also, it's like something that I try to remind myself like, without stillness, a lot of times you don't have those moments of clarity. Because, when you're so busy, like go, 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 new idea, new idea, new idea, it seems awesome and it seems productive, but I guarantee there's a lot of holes that you're missing because
Mm-hmm.
you didn't just sit back and like actually think things through and just be still.
So do you have that? Do you have like maybe a time of day? You have specific things where you quiet everything for a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. After 4 p.m., I,
Yeah.
I am in Zen mode. There's not a single thing that I do. Laptop's closed. I'm in my pajamas. Like, I'm getting ready to just wind down. My morning walks, I also really try to just be present and just take everything in. And I think that's amazing. Um, yeah. And I really try, especially when I first started this, I was just working every single day from, from when I woke up to when I went to bed. And I feel like everybody needs a period of time like that. But
Mhm.
I also feel it burnt me out so much that I didn't like, I had to take a significant amount of time where I was just dragging and I felt like I didn't want to do this anymore. And I never want to feel like that again. So I really try to give myself a lot more flexibility and free time. And I read a quote that really resonated with me, and it said, instead of planning your year in advance with your vacation, or no, yeah, with your vacations planned into your work schedule, plan your work schedule into your vacation schedule, and your year will be completely different.
That is one that's good
Yeah.
because I think that's one thing. I've lived kind of two separate lives, like at this point, where I worked for a long time in the traditional path, and you're working towards your retirement. You take your vacation, once a year, and it was fine. What I didn't realize was I always was sitting there going like, what is wrong with me? Because I wasn't happy,
Yeah.
even though I had a good job and I had the house and the picket fence and the two, heading towards the 2.5 kids and the two labs kind of thing. But I was like, this sucks. I do not want to do this,
Mhm.
and everyone around me, that's all they wanted. And I'm going, am I just insane or what?
Yeah.
And then, the more, that's why social media has had such a big impact on my life, is meeting people that are like, yeah, that's the way I feel too, and they're doing like really cool things, just sort of against the grain a little bit. So that's always like one thing that, because I just didn't grow up with that. And then you were practicing YouTube videos at 7 years old, so
I
yeah,
was I
okay.
was a creative young child. What can I say?
Yeah. So we could probably keep going for a couple hours, but I will wrap this up. If there's anything else, there's a million things I still would like to talk to you about. But so we don't want to talk about too far into the future,
Mhm.
but if you want to talk about, say, what you have going on like right now and how people can sort of get involved with what you're doing, the Empowered Empire and the Project Progress
Yes.
Empowered Empire, the alliteration is just amazing. So if you want to talk a little bit about that before we jump off here and how people can kind of get involved.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you could just follow me on Instagram. That's kind of where everything's going to be home base in for now. Project Progress is like I did say that right. Yeah, I did. It's messing my head. That's just like my personal coaching for now. So that is all linked in my bio, and everything will be continuing to expand as we speak. So I'm very excited about it.
All right, awesome. Yeah, because who knows? I mean, next week everything could be totally different.
It could. I could
All
be
right.
I could fail again. Who knows?
Right, and then start again and
And
again.
there you go.
All right, so I appreciate everyone coming in and commenting. Lots of cat comments and hanging out. Jess, it was so good to finally sit down with you. It was
Yes.
something, you were literally the first person that came to my mind when I was talking about this podcast, because everyone has stories, and one thing that I don't like, see, I'm trying to end this podcast, but I still want to keep going. Um, One thing that I really want people to stop saying and stop feeling like is that just because everyone has a story or everyone is going through hard times doesn't mean that your story is not valid, and doesn't mean that what you're going through is not valid. It's okay to talk about it. It's a good thing to talk about it.
Mhm.
Just because other people are going through it doesn't demean what you're going through. And I just really wanted to hear like more about like what made Jess, and I think we got tons of good stuff from this. So
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I love that. That's such a great like message to end the podcast on, and I could agree 100%.
awesome.
Like, and I think about that a lot, and I promise that we can end it after this. But this is a nugget.
Yeah,
Um,
all the nuggets. We're
yeah,
gonna cut up all the
but
nuggets.
when it comes to like feeling like your problems aren't bad enough, I totally relate to that. And then I was talking to a friend and they said, okay, well, what would a bad problem be? And I would like name something off and they would say, like, okay, so what would that feel like? And I'd be like, well, I don't know because I've never experienced it.
Hmm.
But still, like the worst thing you've ever experienced is no matter what spectrum, still the worst thing you've ever experienced. So it's all just as valid to all of us because, like, I don't know what a lot of your hardships felt like, but I do know what my worst one felt like. And that's just as valid. So
I
never
agree.
feel bad.
I agree. And keep recording your own voice. Listen to it. Learn to love it. That's the message. All right, Jess.
That's that.
It was awesome. We will talk soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.